I love shooting images on white seamless background paper. I'm Mike McKay, and I want to welcome you to this entry-level tutorial on post-processing that type of image. As you may have already discovered, even the best lit, best exposed images shot on white seamless will present you with serious post-processing challenges. The main problem is built right into the shooting situation. Let's use this lighting diagram to remind you that you're pointing your camera into a humongous white reflector. You're shooting into the sun, so to speak. And if your white background is going to be white, there's no way around that. You can see the contrast robbing effect of the veiling flare in this before and after shot. The shot on the left, of course, is as it came out of the camera, and the one on the right is after some post-processing. In this tutorial, I'll demonstrate how to use Adobe Photoshop to bring that image from this to this. So let's get going. The image, if you have downloaded it, is golfer.tiff. The first thing we want to do, I think, is open the Layers palette. We'll go to Window, drag down to Layers. Since most of the work is being done on adjustment layers, it's nice to have that palette handy. And let's create our first curves adjustment layer. We could open it by going to the Layers menu and dragging down to New Adjustment Layer and then over to Curves. But it's actually really easy to find the icon, the Create New Layer icon in your Layers palette, and click it once. Drag down to Curves. There you go. We have our new Curves layer, adjustment layer, and we're ready to go. So let's look at the Properties window that opened when we clicked on the Create New Adjustment Layer icon. What we see when we look at it is a map or a graph of the distribution of the pixels in the image according to their input tonal value. Tonal value can start at 0, which is totally black, and go up to 255, which is totally white. In this image, see that there are a huge number of pixels that are in the white range, and that's not surprising considering the shot. Actually, what is interesting is there is nothing in the image that appears to be black or even really close to black. Now, we can't change the input value, what the camera delivered to us or what our previous post-processing delivered to us is there. So we won't change this. That's where this straight line comes in. It maps the relationship between the input value and the output value. And right now, it's a straight line, which is to say that whatever is input is also what's output. And if I click on the hand tool, you read those input output values to find they just always match. This line is the one thing we can change, so it's going to become our tool for the immediate post-processing that we'll do. Perhaps counterintuitively, the best way to add sparkle back to our image is to add blacks. And we're going to do that very simply by grabbing hold of the bottom part of that line and dragging it over. If you look at the input and output values now, we have an input value of 68 where the line starts, which is to say that everything below that value is going to output as black. Again, we didn't really change anything because there wasn't anything below there, but we have changed a great deal of the values in the other part of the distribution. Notice as you approach pure white, the difference becomes less and less. So while we've made quite a strong change in the black, there's not that much of a change in the white. Now the downside of this is that we have darkened up what were some pretty well exposed skin tones. So let's fix it. And the best way to do it is to click on that hand tool, find the spot that you want to lighten up on, and just drag upward until you're happy with it. You might find that you don't get all the way back up to the original value, but you'll get close. And so you'll have restored that part of the image quite nicely. In doing this, we've reintroduced a bit of the veiling flare. So let's, again with the hand tool click, let's find a darker spot on the image and drag down so that we're bringing our output value a little closer to the black. And when we get it to the point where we're happy with it, and it's totally a judgment thing, voila, we have an image that's, well, at least the main task is done. I want to finish this image with a subtle touch that I almost always use. You'll see the shadows are there and they're important, but they're a tiny bit messy for my image. So what I do normally is I add another curves adjustment layer. And this new curves adjustment layer, I'll name it so that we won't get confused about it, is changed to a screen blend mode. Now you see that has quite an impact on the image, which we're going to fix right away. We're going to click on the mask portion of that curves new adjustment curve layer, and setting our brush to black, nice big soft brush, maybe increase the size a bit, we'll get back the parts of the image we want to keep. So notice I have a little bit softer edge to the shadow. It doesn't run right off the edge of my image, and I'm quite happy with this. I actually might just make sure that I've gotten it off. There we go. And except for touches like adding a watermark and that sort of thing, for my purposes, the post-processing of this image is finished. So we're done. Now that was a well-exposed image to begin with and didn't present any serious complications. It was easy enough that you might well be asking why bother with a video. But let's look at this image of Marshall. I'll bet that the first thing you noticed was the muddy section in the lower left corner of the image. You probably didn't even notice that there's a lot less flare. Of course, the reason there's a lot less flare is because there was a lot less light coming off the background. So this image will be a little trickier to deal with. Let's start though with the same way as we treated the other image. We'll create a new curves adjustment layer. Take a look at the black point, and it does look as if there might be some value to setting it a little higher. Notice the colors are suddenly a little richer. And as we did last time, let's click on the hand tool, bring up the skin tones just a bit, and we'll richen up the colors, if there's such a word. Now normally I just pick a spot. Sometimes you can look for one, but often I find that I'll just pick one lower on the curve, and I have my experiences that seem to have worked for me, and so In this case, I'll just grab it down low somewhere and haul it down a bit. That's a little too much. Okay. So we haven't changed this curve a lot, but we have done that initial adjustment. I'm going to make a slight adjustment to the field of view here because we'll want to see the menu bar in a minute. Now we still need to address that muddy mess in the lower left hand corner. And we're going to address it with, you guessed it, a new curves adjustment layer. I want that layer to be below the first one for reasons we'll see in a minute. So I'm going to click on the image itself, the background, select the new adjustment layer icon, go down to curves, voila. Now we got two layers named curves. Let's name this new one clean background. How about that? This can't be used the same way as previously, because if we drag that line along the input axis, we actually darken the tones. If we drag it leftward along the input axis, we do address the darkness, but we create a really, really bright upper right hand corner. We're going to address this by just preventing the image or Photoshop from allowing any pixels to output at less than, let's say 150, maybe 160. You see what's happened. We have in fact created a nice, decently white background, at least this far. We know later that using a screen layer will fix up that little bit of muddiness that's still there. But of course we've also totally ruined the image. So what we'll do is create a copy of the image, that is the background layer, by clicking on Control J, and we'll slide it above this new curves layer. Okay, so we have seemed to have undone what we just did, and I think you've guessed it. What we're going to do is create a mask. Since this tutorial is not about masking, I've actually gone ahead and prepared the mask for you. Go to Select, down to Load Selection, and you'll find the figure. Click on OK. So you can see the marching ants around the figure. Let's go to the Add Layer Mask icon at the bottom of the Layers panel. Bingo. If you look at the mask here, we have masked the figure. We're getting there. So let's see, let's tweak the adjustments a bit, see what we can do to make this look a little more convincing. So we'll go back to our earlier curves adjustment, and let's see what happens if we adjust the opacity a bit. If I drag down, I can see a hint of the shadow coming in, which I like. I actually want that because it's convincing. Now, but I'm dragging back a little bit of the muddy stuff in the lower left corner. So this is where we go back to the last image we did, and we'll try the same strategy. We'll create a new curves adjustment layer. We're going to keep this behind the image of the figure. We'll make it a screen blend. Okay, and using the same strategy as with the golfer, let's just get back the shadows, but whoops, I think I got a little too much of what I'm trying to avoid here. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to use a white soft brush and take out that shadow on the edge. Maybe I did a little too much, so I'll go back, use a black soft brush, get in a bit of the shadow. Okay, it's a little more convincing. I'm basically pretty happy about it. For print, the whites are probably okay, maybe a little muddy on the lower left. For computer display, they might be a little bright on the upper right. So I am in a position to do a bit of tweaking. We could tweak this probably endlessly, but I do want to show you one little trick that I use a lot. I often find the whites are actually too white. Yep, too white. And so I will often use the inverse of the earlier movement, and I'll drag the whites down ever so slightly to just introduce a bit of gray, and so soften the image considerably. Notice the nature of that line. And at this point, I would say that we have a workable image. We've taken the image from this to a more artistic this. For our final image, which I think is going to prove to be the most difficult, we're going to take it from this to this. This image was made at the end of a session. We'd done quite a bit of shooting and hadn't moved any lights or anything, and got into trying this image. There was something about it that I wanted to keep, something I saw that I'd been looking for, and so the image to me was worth saving. So let's do that. Let's save it. We'll begin by going to the new adjustment layer icon, load a new curves layer, and have a look at the black point. Everything looks overexposed here, doesn't it? But we're going to bring in that black, not all the way, because we don't want the figure to be too contrasty. Now let's just zoom in on the skin tones here and work a bit on that. There is, I know from experimenting with this image that it really does seem to be better if I move the white point in a bit. Okay, and of course you already know what that'll do to the background. So I moved the white point in a bit. Now let's click on the hand tool and see about adjusting the skin tones back to about where we want them, and taking the darker shades back down again. In this case, I think being closer to the foot of the curve leaves us with a more natural looking image. Okay, we're a bit contrasty, but I think we can go with that. So there's our first curve. And actually we could probably make it a little darker, but I'm going to leave it there. I think it's going to work out fine just there. So now we have a totally washed out background. And as we did last time, what we'll do is we'll separate the figure from the background. And as in last time, I will provide you with an already completed mask. So we'll do a Command J and go to the select menu, load selection. We're looking for the figure. Load it. See the marching ants around the figure. And go to the layers palette. Down there you'll find the add layer mask icon. Click on it and we've got a mask. So we can do something about our background now, which is I think seriously overexposed. So what we're going to do is begin by just making it a little less blinding. Take down just a bit, get a little bit of gray to it. Notice what I mentioned about the lighting, it's still a little hot in the middle. And we're going to take care of that little muddy section down here in the lower left, or lower right rather, by lifting that. And actually that doesn't seem to make that enough of a change, but it does make a little bit of a change. We're getting something that is almost flat in terms of our grays and whites here. We still have a hint of shadow detail, and for that I'm grateful. I actually might take it down a bit. This little muddy section, I think what we'll do is we'll deal with that later when we do the final vignetting with the screen layer. What I saw in this was a chance to illustrate how I think a classic pinup should be shot. The old hand-drawn classic pinups, at least the ones that influenced my art, were often placed on a pastel wash of some sort. So I want to do that here. I'm going to add a soft colored background. I'm going to choose a photo filter. I think it's better to do this than to paint in a color. Yeah, we could use that color, but I think we'll go for deep yellow. The yellow, of course, covers the figure, and I like that because I liked what it does to the skin tones. It gives them more of an illustrated, old-fashioned pinup look. Don't know how you feel about the yellow on the clothing, but that's easy to fix. We could do that by selecting a color range. And that's exactly what I did, but I don't want to burden you with a lesson on how to use that right now. So I did, in fact, save the selection. And I'm going to click on the mask for the photo filter and make sure that I have a soft black brush selected. And we can get rid of the yellow in the clothing, or at least in the top. Now Control D will get rid of that. I'd like to give it a little more of a hand-drawn look, so let's use the same brush and just using a little bit of a soft random softening of the edges, let's give it a bit of a washed look. Actually, that's maybe I want to set down the opacity a bit. We'll turn the opacity down to about 3/4 here. So you see how I built in a little bit of a washed look. Nothing radical. And I'm ready to actually begin to close on the finishing of this image. Normally I would close with a screen vignette, and I think I'll do that here. We'll add yet another curve. Make sure that our brush is at full opacity. Set the blend to screen. And then paint back in what we want. Let's use a larger brush. There we go. Notice how that's taken care of that little muddy corner. And for our purposes, this image is complete. I would of course crop it. It's not perfectly composed, but this is where we'll stop this particular tutorial. In closing, let me suggest a few rules. Rule number 1, don't overexpose the background. If you make the mistake of blowing out the background, you're actually adding veiling flare to your image, and the image quality will decline significantly. Number 2, flag sources of spilled light. Those lights that are lighting your background, we would hope, are not lighting your lens. Rule number 3, remove the protective filter from your lens. The protective filter, even the really good ones, will increase the possibility of flare. And finally, use your lens hood. Always use your lens hood. Always use your lens hood.